Okay, can you guys see me? Is everyone here? Okay, perfect. Excellent. Great. It's excellent technology works, isn't it? I appreciate everyone's patience here. All righty. Some great ideas were suggested there when I asked the question about what are some of the steps that we should be taking practically in the area of project management, or if we're involved in a PMO, those in our conversation here as we move forward. Let's first start with some of the principles from project management that are really relevant practically at the moment, considering the times of crisis that you and I are dealing with at the moment. So going back to our fundamentals, our basics, we go back to the definition of what a project is according to the PMBOK guide, right? So a project, they say, is a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result. So that word temporary is really valuable. We need to remind ourselves that this COVID crisis is also temporary. You know, there's a lot of doomsday conversation out there, and it's important to keep a positive, realistic, but positive outlook there. Every project goes through progressive elaboration, right? And we're going through that as well with this particular crisis. We're learning more about it. Right now, we're at the early stage of this cone of uncertainty, but a lot of effort is being put by various government entities and nonprofits and pharmaceuticals out there to reduce this cone of uncertainty, to find solutions. And this is something that's been recommended from the Project Management Institute. PMI introduced this concept of the cone of uncertainty all the way back in the early 2000s, actually, the second edition of the PMBOK guide. So this is not a new idea per se, but it has taken on a little bit more of a fashionable statement in the last few years with the emergence of agile principles out there, right? So the agile world claims that they are more rapidly able to trim down this cone of uncertainty to reach solution options sooner. So we're hoping that that can happen with this pandemic as well. Now, we are also reminded in the PMBOK guide that not everything is in our control. There are many enterprise environmental factors out there. So whether they are external factors or internal to our organization, there are a number of factors that affect the success of our projects, and we need to keep that in mind, right? So our projects need to have a certain level of resilience is the term that PMI uses. And so we need to build that in, and hopefully this is going to be a really valuable lesson learned in historic times for us to going forward. Once we recover from this, how will we in the future take into account such eventualities? We also are learning to highly value organizational process assets. Again, a term that the PMBOK guide has coined several decades ago. Organizational process assets, as many of you would know, are broken out into processes and procedures. So there are policies, guidelines. That would include at the moment business continuity guidelines. What do you do? What are the norms for working remotely? What are the norms for conducting virtual team member feedback? And what are the HR procedures for dealing with things from a virtual remote perspective? What kind of access can you and can you not grant to resources who are working maybe outside your jurisdiction during times of emergency and crises? So we need to have those processes and procedures built in with our business continuity partners in the project management arena to make sure that we've got that going. And then the corporate knowledge base becomes so very important in a time of crisis. Prior project documents, templates, any one of us can fall sick. One of my clients here in the United States right now is an energy company, and they're preparing for upwards of 50% of their associates to be off work. That's what they're planning for. that as of this summer, we may lose half our personnel to being sick or having to care for someone in their family who's ill. So how do we as an organization, that's what this entity is trying to plan out. How does this entity survive? They have got over 40, 50,000 employees across the nation. How do they survive with half the personnel, right? You need a corporate knowledge base for that to work. When skilled resources are not going to be available, where you can leverage their knowledge through some knowledge repository of some sort. We've all been through some sort of calamity, perhaps, right? We've lived through many, maybe some of you lived through, you will recall 9/11, the tragedy there. I personally went through Hurricane Igor in Newfoundland and Labrador up in the eastern end of Canada in 2010. And Hurricane Igor was devastating. I thought it was going to be one of the most atrocious experiences I would have in my life until I encountered COVID. And after we encountered Hurricane Igor, we as a government, I was working for the government at that time, provincial government in Canada, we established and retroed back to incorporate several valuable lessons learned so that we wouldn't make the mistakes that, or we could prevent the sort of tragedies that happened as a result of this particular hurricane. It was a very valuable experience. So hopefully at this point, we are, along with trying to just sustain ourselves, we're also capturing and documenting things that are happening so we can capture lessons learned, evaluate them in the future. And then when we go back, when things calm down, we can actually come up with solutions, more preventative measures for the future so that we can prevent the kind of business interruption or the business pain that maybe some of the organizations you're associated with are feeling at the moment. So again, this term project resilience comes back, which I mentioned. This is mentioned in the PMBOK guide in chapter 11 in the risk chapter. They refer to this thing known as unknowable unknowns. There are obviously a number of unknowable unknowns out there. The impact of COVID-19 being resilience heavily been built into our structures, from a portfolio level, from a program level, from a project level. That needs to be assessed, that needs to be looked at going forward for sure. This is a term that was coined by the US military a few years ago, and the PMBOK guide has incorporated it. We live in a world of VUCA, right? Perfect example of the current scenario. We live in a world with tremendous volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And in this environment, we need to continue to deliver value. We need to continue to deliver results that matter. So taking into account VUCA, our project management offices need to educate culture, not dissuaded or demotivated by what they encounter VUCA, rather than take it on as a challenge and they go straight into delivering value in our projects, regardless of the circumstances that we are encountering. Okay, so we need an integrated risk management approach, obviously, right? And the best way to do that at an organizational level is if you are in an environment that has a project management office, and the project management office can play a critical role in this place. If you are an entity that does not have a PMO, then there may be some pseudo PMO-like entity or enterprise within your organization that can play this role. In some organizations, this is residing in the engineering department. In other places, it resides in finance under maybe the CFO. Nonetheless, we need an integrated approach that takes a holistic view of the risks and uncertainties that we're encountering as an organization, taking into account all the non-event risks. So just the fact that we are in a particular industry, for example, if you're in the petrochemicals industry or you're in the banking industry, there are risks just because you're in that particular vertical, there are risks. Just because of the fact that you are currently going through this pandemic, there are risks that your organization is encountering. So taking all that into account from a very holistic view, we need an integrated approach to managing risks. All right, So I'm going to enter into our 10 secrets now, okay, of how we can work through this. And again, please feel free to chip in with your comments, ideas, and thoughts in the chat box along the way. All right, I'd like this to be a discussion by all means. So, number one, as a PMO, and I'm going to take a PMO centric view here, okay? And as I said, some of your organizations may have a formal PMO, some others may have a little bit more of an ad hoc governance system to just immediately assess the impact of COVID-19, right? So we need a rational, non-emotional, practical reasoning right now with an empathetic tone. Emotions are high, concerns are high, depending on what city you're in, or what part of the world you're in. So the information that's coming out on a daily basis in majority of the cities and countries is that the numbers are increasing. That's causing nervousness, it's causing confusion. We all have loved ones who may be getting impacted, friends who we know who are getting. I personally know several people who are suffering from COVID-19, and so obviously that takes a toll on you. But we need to, while maintaining our own to this COVID-19 and its impact on projects. Okay, so we need to do that rational assessment ASAP if that hasn't happened yet, with that rational mindset. Let's go on. Number two. So we now need to, if we haven't already, my guess is that many of your organizations had business continuity plans, maybe even a business continuity department, which is great. But I'm going to venture to guess that maybe in some places or in many places it was inadequate for this type of pandemic, or for the length of the duration of this pandemic and the type of impact it's had on the global supply chain. So we need to take into account and see what we can do immediately for business continuity. But then we also need to start discussing very quickly what's going to happen after this pandemic is over, right? We're not going to be in this state forever, right? Uh, there will be some light at the end of the tunnel. The sun will shine again. And how will we then continue to sustain our business after this pandemic is over? So we need to make sure that the message here is that we need to make sure that whatever business decisions we make right now, while we want to survive this turbulent time, we also want to make sure that what we're doing doesn't harm us in the long run. We need to come up with an approach that is positive for the future as well, once this pandemic is over. So, what is our team doing today to prepare for that positive tomorrow, or that post COVID-19 tomorrow? That becomes a very important conversation. Number three. Now, you and I all know that we're all getting bombarded with information. There are conspiracy theories, there's this, there's that going on. We need to be that source of reliable information, the trusted single source of truth, right? There's a lot of unofficial information flying around, even within our organizations, about what's going on with projects. This project's going to be canceled, this is going to happen, that's going to happen. Let us, as a project management office, be that single trusted source of truth, right? Instead of rumor mongering, we are going to be that forward thinking communications channel where we will present and articulate information as a reliable source. And again, we will leverage information radiators. So, let's leverage dashboards. People are working remotely. They're on their mobile devices for several hours a day now during office hours. So let's leverage information radiator that they can easily look at on a mobile device, some easy to view dashboards, charts, tables, things of that nature. Number four, and I refer you back to the PMBOK guide. So in the integration chapter in this current edition of the PMBOK guide, which is in chapter 4, they have a new process that they introduced with this edition, the 6th edition, which is manage project knowledge, right? So right here, talking about manage project knowledge. This is a new process that was introduced, and we want to really embrace this one right now. So if I pull up the PMBOK guide, I have it right here with me. In the PMBOK guide, they talk about this, and in this particular section, they have a number of valuable things they suggest that we incorporate when we're managing project knowledge. Because the thing is that with the fact that several of our key resources are at risk of getting ill themselves, or they may need to support family members or friends or communities where this illness may spread, right? So there's a very, very strong need for this. So under managing project knowledge, they talk about two things. One is information management, the other is knowledge management. They're slightly different. So knowledge management is where you're actually training, teaching me a new skill, right? A new capability. Whereas information is just updating me on things that I already know. Like if you give me the new weather, the updated weather, you give me the current stock price for Apple, for example. That's just knowledge you're sharing with me. You're not enhancing my skills per se. We need both of those things, right? And as a PMO, we want to support what we call learning organizations. We want to embrace the concept that we are and that we are building a learning organization whereby what we're going to do here is that we're actually going to encourage our organizations to be able to grow out of this. Again, while not trying to sound very negative, and I hope I'm totally wrong about this. I hope and pray that I am wrong, and the experts who are predicting some of these things, I hope and pray that they're wrong. There is a possibility that a significant number of our key resources will get ill, as I said, or someone they know will get ill and they will not be able to work, even virtually. What happens if, heaven forbid, one of you cannot continue to work for 2-3 months for whatever reason? Do you have that backup in place? Do you have that knowledge management in place? Do you have that information management in place? Have you paired your knowledge with someone else in the organization so they can sustain, so that the organization can sustain itself? Does your PMO have that type of mechanism in place in a structured manner? If not, we need to do something about it, and we need to do something about it ASAP, as soon as possible. How can we adapt and think of other solutions? Well, that's a very good question being asked. I'm addressing one of the questions being asked. How can we adapt and think of other solutions? Because 90% of our work is in the field and with beneficiaries. Well, everything needs to be planned. You know, my doctor says I need to lose weight, I need to go to the gym. Of course, my doctor is wrong, as those of you who have met me know. He can't be right about that. But jokes aside, your doctor says you've got to take time out to go to the gym to work out, right? Well, just like that, you've got to take time out, and it's a lot more difficult during a time of crisis and a pandemic like this, where everyone's on edge, right? But you've got to take time. You've got to come back to the mothership, right? And connect virtually, remotely, and somehow take the time out to discuss these things, raise these things with senior management so that we are not surprised. Okay, moving on. Let me erase this real quick. Okay. Number 5, we need to conduct a SWOT analysis of our PMO. So SWOT analysis, many of you know, stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. We need to understand very quickly what are our strengths and weaknesses. So within our organization as a PMO, what strengths do we have? What areas of influence do we have at the moment, right? As well as where are some of our weaknesses internally, the areas that we think that we cannot potentially influence at the moment. Likewise, we need to understand what opportunities and threats we have from outside the PMO. What areas that we can leverage maybe? What are areas that where we can add value that we have not in the past? We need to be thinking outside the box right now, right? It's that idea that we're going to do whatever it takes. It's a very agile concept that we're going to do whatever it takes right now to help the Titanic prevent the Titanic from sinking, right? That's the concept we need to incorporate and embrace here. And everyone, and then we do this ourselves, and then we set the tone and become the example for others in the organization to think the same way as well. Moving on, number 6, we critically review the PMO roadmap. So, we all have had plans, quarterly plans, strategic plans, year-end plans, whatever plans you've had, maybe PI planning if you're doing safe, agile, for example. Depending on the type of structure you're in, you've got all kinds of roadmaps and built out story maps built out. We need to quickly revise these, review these, ensure that these roadmaps are realistic. And where they're not, we need to quickly establish a very realistic roadmap. Nothing can be more agonizing and stressful at a time like this than to be on a road where you know you're not going to get to the end in any realistic fashion, where you don't see the end in sight. It's very demotivating for employees. It's very demotivating for your vendors and suppliers. And by the way, take care of your vendors and suppliers and partners. They're part of the family. They're critical to the value chain at the moment. We're learning to respect every step of the value chain. What we took for granted, in the offshore market and here and there, we've got to respect the entire value chain. Everyone is critical to the value delivery, and we've got to honor and respect every single individual, regardless of location, regardless of position or title. Every resource is worthy of honor and respect, and we're realizing that today. So we've got to very quickly ensure that our roadmap is realistic, right? And we need to then use this roadmap as a fundamental communication tool to manage stakeholder expectations. So many entities have made all kinds of commitments to various stakeholders, whether they be internal or external. We need to very quickly revise those, enhance those, and send an updated roadmap. You see, it's not sufficient for me to call you and say, hey, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to deliver. Instead of that, a more positive message would be, look, I know I was supposed to deliver to you in June. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, I'm not going to be able to deliver to you in June, but I will be able to deliver to you in, let's say, October. That's a better message. Instead of just giving me a negative, you give me the negative, but you also solutionize for me, please. Okay, so let's come up with a realistic roadmap, share that with our internal, external stakeholders, so we're solution-centric, solution-oriented. Moving on to number 7. So we're dealing with our 10 secrets here, right? And as I said, I'm going to incorporate and inculcate the teachings from the PMO world. Number 7, let's quickly review the services being provided by the PMO. Which ones are valuable, right? This is a really good time to trim the fat, get rid of the waste, which is known as muda. There's 7 types of waste or muda out there. So maybe there's some services that we right now should stop. They're not that valuable for this time period, right? There may be a need for us to quickly update or create a service catalog, a service of offerings. Maybe it's on our website, intranet site or something, so that others in the organization understand what the PMO can potentially do. Go out there, find the pain in the organization. Again, find the pain, all right? And go there and see what service you can offer, what value you can deliver, all right? Again, are all the services that we're delivering, are they being delivered effectively? Do we have the KPIs, the metrics in place to measure them? You know, has the KPI stream broken right now because of this? We need to keep track of that. Are we still meeting the needs of this business in this turbulent time? You know, let's quickly adapt ourselves. Let's bring some business agility to our mindset and to our practical force here very, very quickly. Number 8, let's remember one thing. Our most valuable asset are our human resources, okay? Our most valuable asset are human resources. So let's stay connected to the people, right? And a PMO can be a phenomenal instrument for integrating this sense of being people-centric if we do it right. It's very easy for all of us to, as I say in my slide here, become self-absorbed with rounds of conference calls and meetings and action items and things to do and, you know, very pointed messages, you know, just about work, 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 and work. Let's take some time out. Let's do some virtual coffee breaks, some virtual happy hours. Just check in. How you doing? You know, how are things going with you? Just take some time to breathe. Accept the reality that we're in. Calm ourselves down, right? Social distancing does not mean that we're in this alone. Definitely not today. Look at us today. I'm sitting in Houston today, right? Several of you are in various different locations across the world, different time zones, yet we're able to communicate here and share knowledge and hopefully add value to each other's presence on Earth. Number 9, it is very important to lead by example. Let's show some emotional intelligence, some social intelligence, and cultural intelligence. So there's 3 things here I just listed here. Emotional intelligence, how do you control your emotions? Social intelligence, how do you deal with your teammates, your associates, your organization, your community at large, your city, your county, your state, your province, wherever you're living, your country, right? Your social intelligence, and then cultural intelligence. There are different ways that different, for example, generations are seeing this. In my own home, for example, my parents and then my children, they view this very differently. In your organizations, you've got people who are close to retirement versus young folks who are just coming on board after college and university, and they have their entire future ahead of them. How do you think they feel that their entire career aspirations ahead are being blocked by COVID-19, right? So we need to lead by example here with that cultural sensitivity as well. So there's emotional intelligence, social intelligence, and cultural intelligence, and we need to lead by example here. Lead amidst this uncertainty, this anxiety, this fear that's out there. Bring things back to facts, trusted facts, not, you know, Facebook and Snapchat facts, but actual trusted facts, please. Okay. Again, of course, take the time to care for others, and it starts with you and me stepping up to the plate to do this. And another extremely important thing I've got to tell you right now is if some of your organizations, some of your teams have been impacted with the volume of work that you typically used to face and encounter, and now perhaps some of that's been impacted due to the supply chain or what have you. Client orders have been delayed or canceled even, unfortunately. This may be a unique time to professionally develop your teams. It may be time to invest in your resources, invest in forming new leaders, invest in some certification options, invest in picking up some best of breed practices from the industry out there, learn from other fellow organizations. You can do this in a number of ways. There are virtual meetups going on. I'm in conversations with several organizations, for example, right now in the GCC region, where I will be doing virtual webinars like this for them. So there are a lot of knowledge sharing opportunities taking place online. This is one example of that, right? but there are also other training sessions going on, other certification training sessions. For example, LEORON here, I will be running a session with LEORON starting April 12th for the Certified PMO Professional track, where we will go in deep on key principles of how to run a PMO. It's a 5-day, very deep dive into project management offices with case studies, and there's obviously an exam, a fun exam at the end. I apologize, on the last day. And then you get certified at the end of the 5-day journey. But this may be a time to do something like that, whatever that may be. And there are many other options out there for you to look at as well, but that would be something for you to consider. It's a time to do an asset assessment of your resources. What level of competence does each team member have? Where do you see opportunities where we can quickly refine some of those, upgrade some of them, where you didn't have that time in the past? So before you get busy, because once this COVID crisis is over, guess what? There's going to be another storm. All this pent-up work, all this pent-up demand is going to hit you. And again, you won't have time for training and development and those other things that are seen as ancillary. So this may be a perfect time to leverage for that. Absolutely, that's true. I agree with you, Malik. Um, um, you know, what you cannot manage from home, there are limitations and some restrictions on that, and that is to be respected. Again, you've got to communicate that with the relevant authorities and try to solutionize around it. I mean, if there are 10 things, right, that you are being expected to do or that you used to do, and now it's been impacted because you're not going into a physical office space or a physical site of some sort. um, Challenge yourself to see, out of these 10 things that you used to do, is there one or two or three or four, are there any things amongst this list that we can potentially do? Is there some other workaround? Is there some other option? Brainstorm with your senior management, brainstorm with your associates, brainstorm with others in other organizations where you may see that work is continuing in some creative manner, and then try to adopt and pick up some of those things that we thought we were not going to be able to do in the US from home, we are doing right now. Okay. I mean, a lot of this information is proprietary, so I can't necessarily share. But for example, just general things that were considered to be extremely secure, and it was like, no, we must do this only from an office space because the security measures are extremely sensitive to it. Well, now guess what? Because of this pandemic, we're having to change those rules, right? And in a very risk managed manner, we are allowing certain things now to be done remotely that we normally used to not allow to do. Okay. With, of course, the appropriate approvals from the regulatory authorities from government and what have you. Okay. So how can we form a contingency plan which generates revenue in the current circumstances? Very good question, Zaid. Look, there is a cost of managing risks, right? And part of that is developing a contingency plan. A contingency plan's role is not directly to help you generate revenue, obviously. A contingency plan's primary purpose, as you know, is to manage risks in some capacity. And primarily is to deal with those risks that we accept or that we mitigate, but we can't bring it down to zero. That's typically where a contingency plan kicks in, right? Now, on the revenue generation side, that's a slightly different conversation, unfortunately. It doesn't directly tie in with the contingency plan. So that's a conversation you need to have with the business side to renegotiate contracts, maybe renegotiate the margins, maybe renegotiate payment terms, maybe establish more relaxed receivables terms so that your customers will continue to do business with you during this. It's a time to meet people in the middle ground. It's not ideal for anyone, all right? So your payment terms, let's say, were net 60, for example. Well, maybe make it net 120. Allow them, instead of 60 days, allow them 120 days to pay, for example, right? Or some other method that will enable them to continue to engage with you in some capacity, right? Give what you can right now, so in the long run you can receive again, right? The goodwill that you show right now will stay. People remember organizations that were there to support their business during times of crisis. All right. A lot of organizations, I'm going back in history now, but when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, this is back, I think, in 2005, if I remember my dates correctly. Hurricane Katrina, when it hit, a lot of organizations went in and provided services for free. Okay. Those same organizations later on benefited. So there is a value in, your brand, your reputation, your image improves if you have the wallet and the capacity to handle that. Then maybe that's something for you to convince and talk to your leadership about. How can I assure that online courses are attended by employees during these difficult times? Well, you want to do, this is a webinar, right? So this is not an online training session, Kauthar. What you want to do, Kauthar, is ideally, if you're really looking for that, that engagement, you really need to do a live course, right? With engagement, right? Small class sizes, small virtual class sizes. So I'd say, a class size of not more than 10 to 15 participants, in which an instructor is able to give that one-on-one attention. Then you're in touch with that instructor to find out what's going on, how progress is happening. And again, the attendees that you send should be motivated to attend these programs. It should be in alignment with their career aspirations, so they see the benefit and the value of attending a particular program, right? It is very easy right now to get distracted, to get demotivated, to get de-energized. And as I say, training might be one option to refocus some of that energy back into something positive. PMO stands for Project Management Office. So a project management office, as I said, right, is basically typically, there are different types of PMOs everywhere in the world. And it could be a supportive type of structure. Typically, a project management office is an office through which project managers are given some direction and some support to run projects in an organization. I'm just reading through the questions here, see if there's something there. There's a lot of repeat questions. I'm just seeing if there's something different. Yes, absolutely. A very good point by Mohammed. So Mohammed makes this very, very valuable point. So those of you who are leaders on this call right now, he says, I believe task forces for such pandemics should have members from all levels of the organization, not just upper management. That's absolutely true. Absolutely. That goes back to TQM, the concept of total quality management that came in decades ago from the manufacturing world. What it did is it empowered the frontline workers. And that was the value realization that management cannot be on the, in the factory floor all the time, right? And they don't have the pulse of the workflow as well as the front curtain for us to take that into account. Badur asks, how do we prepare post-recovery from the pandemic? Well, think about it, I go back to trying to remind myself of other traumatic events that I've encountered in my professional career. So soon after I came out of university, I came out just before this 9/11 incident happened. And so that was traumatic. And we thought the world is going to come to an end and your business will no longer continue this and that. We recovered from it, right? Then we've had SARS, we've had H1N1, we've had other tragedies, tsunamis and earthquakes. And hurricanes, and various unfortunate events, man-made and natural, across the world. Um, and we've come through. We've recovered from all of them. So it's important to prepare and learn from this. So take into account, for example, let's be realistic. After this, guess what type of careers will open? A lot of careers around risk management, around business continuity, around cybersecurity, around project management offices with a risk management strength in it, right? How do you manage projects? How do you estimate and plan for contingencies in projects? These are areas where there'll be a higher need. So start preparing for that in advance. Start reading up and preparing on disaster recovery, business continuity, project management offices, project management, risk management, those type of things. How do you build business agility? Those are the type of skills you probably want to build in to your portfolio of skills that you have as an individual, for example, right? What tools can we provide the organization to help demonstrate resilience? Well, we need to have a very defined, realistic plan that's integrated. So that's why we call it an enterprise risk management or an integrated risk management approach, where we take into account the holistic impact across the organization. So, we, whether it's qualitative analysis techniques, just doing things like risk scoring or risk priority numbers. Again, I apologize, I'm throwing a lot of terms out there that you can look at later on, or doing something more quantitative, such as, Monte Carlo or Latin hypercube sampling, which requires a slightly higher skill set. But nonetheless, those are some options out there that you can use. And then ultimately you roll that up into some sort of, work performance reports or dashboards that your senior management can look at least people who are there in the decision making. Yeah, so hiring will take time by government procedures. Well, those are the type of things, if you already know in advance, that's a very good point. Someone, again, it's an anonymous name, so I don't know who it is, but it makes a very good point. She or he says, we know the work will pile up, which will need to be done after this crisis is over. So we're going to need a whole bunch of extra manpower, is what this person is saying. So what needs to be done to cope up with this? Since the government procedures will be, will hamper us, will slow us down after this crisis. Well, since you already know this now, you've already identified this as a risk. That's great. That's step number one. So kudos for doing that. Now you need to think through the different options. I don't know your industry, I don't know your specific circumstances, but perhaps you can figure out if it's allowed, or if it's not, maybe challenge the status quo to think, will we be able to outsource some of this outside our boundaries? For example, can we outsource some of this to country X, Y, or Z? Right? Can we do this in a remote area? I mean, the concept of remote work has gained acceptance, obviously because of COVID-19, right? And we've suddenly become experts at it, or we've had to become experts at it. Necessity is a mother of invention. So this may be that opportunity for you to think about those things for an interim solution at least. So let's say you want to hire John Smith to come on board as a resource, but it's going to take 6 months for John Smith's process to go through the government procedures. Well, maybe you can convince your entity or establish a process where John Smith can work remotely for these 5-6 months until he can come on board physically and be physically on site with you. That might be an option, but at least you've done the right thing, number one, by identifying it. Now you've got to take the next step, which is to brainstorm and solutionize with it with the right people who can actually make that decision. Okay. Yeah, cash flow, of course, is a challenge. Cash is king right now. Cash is queen right now. And we hope for the best there. That's why the entire supply chain needs to be respectful of that, needs to be mindful of that. Whatever each of us can do to play our part. Look, we're in this together. COVID-19 has taught us something very important. It's very humbling. It is really a humbling experience if you think about it. We as a human race have been, I don't want to get into philosophy here, but been very, very arrogant. And this has been a very, very humbling experience for all of us. It shows us the reality of how interdependent we are in each other, right? So you cannot be safe alone. You can only be safe if I'm also being safe in my approach, right? We're collectively in this together. Our supply chain is interdependent. Our medicine supply is interdependent. Our healthcare supplies are interdependent. Our emergency supplies are interdependent. It's a very humbling experience. So whatever you can do right now to ease the cash flow burden on your partners may in the long run help you wherever you can in the food chain, whatever you can do, right? There's obviously going to be the risk of unemployment during COVID-19 or as a result of COVID-19. You're absolutely right, Afridi. You're absolutely correct. So how do you deal with that? Well, guess what? Be prepared for it. This is the time to upgrade your skills. Figure out, do a risk assessment of yourself. What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? Where do I see opportunities? Where am I seeing the threats? So the threats I'm seeing that I may lose my job. The threats are that the market will not have a lot of opportunities for my skill set. Well, then build those areas out where you see the weakness, right? This is the time to do that and do it quick. Don't think about it. Just act on it super fast. Don't procrastinate. Should there be a PMO, Samir asks, in every department in an organization? There are different structures to an organization. Okay, there isn't one right answer to that. In some organizations, there's a PMO that's, I would call it an enterprise PMO or EPMO, let's say, right? It would cater to the entire organization, every single type of project. So whether it's an IT project or a sales project or a government project or a construction project, everything falls under it. But in other organizations, they break it out by department, okay? So there may be an IT project management office separate, then a separate engineering project management, a separate sales project management. That could also happen. There are different pros and cons to each one. It's a longer discussion there, but that's something that needs to be assessed and looked at. And when we do maturity assessments and we do assessments on the consulting side as LEORON, we go into an organization, we assess the entire PMO structure, and we would make recommendations depending on, the type of flavor that makes most sense for your organization. Is a PMO helpful for operational organization? Adnan asks that. So yeah, Adnan, by the way, good to have you. Adnan's a good friend of mine and honorable student of mine from the past, so good to have you on board. Yes, of course, it's helpful for operations as well. When your project side is, projects and operations are married to the hip together. We're tied to the hip together, right? We complement and support each other in the value delivery. If one side is strong, it helps the other, obviously. And you can embrace principles from the PMO in your operational side as well. Absolutely. Why not? You leverage both, one for the other. How to create a culture of high trust amongst organizations and leaders in times of crisis. For the teams of personnel to work from home. Okay, so Jimmy's asking an interesting question. Jimmy asks, how do you develop that culture of trust? Boy, you've got to, this goes back to McGregor's theory X and theory Y. This is an old theory that's been there. Again, I apologize, I'm mentioning a lot of academic terms here as well, maybe, but look this up. Anyone who's done the PMP, or any of these certifications like CBAP or would have come across McGregor's theory X and theory Y. So theory Y there, Y as in Yankee, talks about this idea that as a manager, as a leader, you need to inculcate a sense of trust in your associates. So basically, if you are working for me, let's say Jimmy, just then I would convey the message to you that I trust you, Jimmy. You're a trusted partner of mine. I trust that you'll do the right thing for the organization. I trust that you're here to deliver value, right? I trust that you want to do a good job. I trust that you're motivated. I trust that you're excited to be here, and give you that leeway to deliver value. One thing that motivates employees is a sense of autonomy, that sense that I can make some decisions on my own. I'm not being micromanaged. And so that's a little bit of a longer conversation, but look up McGregor's theory, why you may get some ideas from there, Jimmy, and hopefully you can build that and convey that to leadership in your organization. Do PMOs deal with procrastination? Yeah. So that's a good question. You know, how do you deal with procrastination? We all suffer from that. Guilty, number one, right here. But you know, how do we deal with procrastination? We time box everything. The human race wouldn't do anything if there weren't deadlines, correct? So I would say, John, I need this by Wednesday. That drives you and motivates you to some extent, as long as it's a realistic deadline, of course. So deadlines, time boxing things are very important. Status check-ins. That's why PMOs establish weekly, monthly, quarterly check-ins to make sure those things are in some way motivating. They prevent what we call Parkinson's law or the student syndrome. Again, terms that you can look up in that regard. I'm just reading the next questions. What expertise should project manager? What expertise should be project manager and manager? There's team activity. Yeah, so you know, in a task force, I think the question that's being asked, if I understand it correctly, and I apologize, is that the question that's being asked is this task force that we're talking about in these times of crisis, how can you know, project management skills be valuable here? Well, look, project management, the first thing that PMI teaches us is integration. That's the first knowledge area. So there are 10 knowledge areas for those of you who are familiar with the PMI material. That's great. But, you know, project management teaches us to take an integrated view of the world, correct? An integrated view requires an analysis of the entire picture: scope, schedule, cost, quality, communications, your human resources, your other resources like physical resources, risks, procurement, so your contracts, your partners, your suppliers, your vendors, your joint venture partners, your stakeholders. These are the 10 knowledge areas. These principles are phenomenally useful in a task or during times of emergency, because you're that sounding board for reasoning where you are taking into account an integrated view. Someone comes in with a crisis, all they're seeing is their one particular view of things, correct? Instead of that one particular individual view, you're providing that holistic view of things, right? You're right. Supply chain may move, Malik. That's actually an entire possibility as well. There may be a skill set there for you to develop and grow. I don't disagree with you there. Absolutely. The entire supply chain across the globe, its current mode operandi will be challenged now. It has been challenged now, right? Shihana asks a very good question. How can I assess my team progress remotely? Well, the first thing is, don't be too harsh on yourself. You have, if you're a Superman or Superwoman, you at best are only able to deliver about 40 hours of valuable time to an organization. If you're Superwoman or Superman, okay? I frankly speaking, I'm not at that level. So, you know, I may get paid for 40 hours of work, but I'm not sure if I deliver valuable 40 hours of work, you know? So take it a little easier on yourself as to how much you can do, all right? You know, where some of us are feeling extremely obliged to deliver during this time of crisis. Relax. We're going through a crisis. So our performance, our progress will be impacted. Likewise for your associates, okay? Your team members are impacted, right? How do you check in? Have small team sizes, at least who are directly reported. Have a minimum number of direct reports, not more than 8 to 10 direct reports that you can keep track of. If you've got 45 direct reports and you can really only work about 40 hours a week, well, good luck trying to maintain that and manage that. It's going to be very difficult. If you've got 8 to 10 reports, you can check in with each person on a daily basis. You can have group discussions. You can have a daily check-in. I love the concept of daily stand-ups. It's an old idea, but it's been brought into fashion with Agile. Every single morning, we start the day with a quick check-in. How's everybody doing? What's going on? What are you going to do today? What problems are you facing? What's your, what did you do yesterday? A quick check-in, not micromanagement. Not micromanagement, just a quick check-in. It's a healthy, constructive conversation. If we need to represent or present to the board of directors during this time, how can we present the realistic timelines? Um, put in a lot of contingency there. Don't under promise, under promise, under promise. Okay, be very realistic about it, folks. We don't even know. We don't even have a solution yet. Again, I don't want to get all negative here, okay? But we don't even have this figured out. The smartest people, are getting this wrong. We've got to be very, very careful at the moment before we start making all kinds of promises and commitments. Okay. Yes, Faiz, I like your positive comment. Faiz says that surely with every tragedy, crisis, or pain, new opportunities will open. And so with hope and faith, we will overcome this as well, for sure. And I appreciate that positive comment. Welcome aboard, Tosif. A question being asked by Anas is, what's the first thing I have to do as a project manager when I have to do change requests? Well, the first thing you need a governance structure. There's PMI has a process. For those of you who've done the PMPs, they have a process called Perform Integrated Change Control. It's called PICC for short by some people. You need a governance structure in place for dealing with changes, right? Who's going to review it? Who's going to approve it? What's that process? That needs to be agreed to up front. And if as a project manager, you're going into an environment where that is missing, you go in into a client and there's no governance structure for how changes are going to be dealt with, well then you need to do something. You would become that voice of reasoning again. Hey guys, ladies and gentlemen, we're dealing in an environment where there's no structured integrated change management process. Let's develop a governance model around that. That would be phenomenal value add that you would add in that particular equation. If someone's new to project management, the best way to get them up to speed is to pair them up with the king or queen, right? Look at the SABICs and the Aramcos of the world. That's what they do. They put you on rotations, right? You've got best examples right there. ADNOC. I mean, look at how they bring people up to speed within 2 years. Rotations. They attach them to senior engineers, senior experts. They go around for a few months here, a few months there, a few months in different project sites. And in 2 years, they are absolutely confident they've learned from the best of the breed. Yeah, so the oil industry, you're right. Someone here, Kulukarni, mentions that the oil industry is going through a crisis as well. Absolutely, and we will need to realistically assess the impact of that. We need to be doing that now. We need to be forecasting. I'm not an expert in forecasting at all, but we need to be assessing the impact of these things on our projects and what have you. And that realistic conversation needs to take place with a very realistic, rational lens. Okay. Yes, absolutely, Jawar. I'll do that for sure. Thank you for joining in. Jawar has just asked for a summary at the end, and I'll be happy to do that. How do you determine an organization's resource capacity? Well, leverage your human resources, leverage your department managers for that. Leverage your frontline supervisors who know the associates in their capacity. So, for example, the one very important thing I tell folks is if you've got 3 accountants on the team, for example, at the same grade level, that doesn't mean that their capacity is exactly the same. You may have, within the same grade and same pay scale, you may have someone who's at the top of the top there, right? So he or she can produce at the scale of 10 out of 10. And then you have another one who's absolutely at the lowest end of this echelon, but good enough to stay on the team, right? Not everybody is a Ronaldo or a Messi on the soccer team, but they're good enough to be on the team, right? So you need to assess what each team member individually can do. And you know, if you're in a central sort of area, you can't do that. So you need to rely on the supervisors, frontline supervisors who can give you that answer. Again, a very critical role. A lot of people are asking questions about risk management. So it's very, very important that we, as a PMO, I mean, that's a critical part of any PMO, right? I mean, you know, I have had the good fortune and honor to see many of the PMOs operating in some of the largest of largest organizations in the GCC region, and they have very mature risk management teams, right? So this is where now the theory comes into practice, folks. This is where you exhibit all those things that you have been. This is your moment to shine, you know, in that regard. Moyes is asking, how do we increase time productivity and time management? Well, one of the first things is there's two sides to the equation. You can either be extremely unproductive and sit in your pajamas all day, or you can actually become overproductive at home and burn yourself out and just not take any time out. So maintain a balance, you know. I take, you know, I'm working as well all day. So what I do, I take calls in my backyard. When the sun is out, it's nice. You can take a phone call if you don't have to be on a video call. You don't have to do a presentation. It's healthy. Go outside, take a walk while doing a meeting. Nothing wrong with that. It's nice and healthy in your backyard, in a safe space where you know you're not meeting other people. You're keeping social distancing. Take time out for yourself. Maintain your sanity. Do some, if you know, I'm guilty myself. I never take enough time out for exercise. Take time out to exercise. Take time out to eat healthy. You know, go to sleep on time. Do those basic things so you don't go cuckoo, right? And then manage your time. Break your day out. Take time out for family. Take time out for work. Break your, if you've got 4 different projects you're working on, then break time out for each project. And again, don't kill yourself by overcommitting yourself. Keep it real, okay? But keep yourself focused. Keep yourself engaged. It's very easy to lose focus at this time. Yeah, job security is a challenge for sure. You've got to somehow, how do you show that? You've got to show, there's a very good question being asked by Hussam. Hussam is asking that, you know, during this current COVID-19 crisis, job security is a major issue, and I totally agree with that. So how do you show, how do you convince leadership of the long-term strategic value in this? Well, number one, data is king or queen here, metrics, right? Unquestionable black and white results are very important here. You and I know that the amount of time it takes to bring someone up to speed. I mean, if I bring you on, if let's say if you hire me, right now, to come and join your team full time, the first 3-4 months, I'm just going to be understanding your organization, understanding your culture. I mean, the value delivered for the first 3-4 months is going to be quite minimal that I'll be able to do, correct? So, you know, there's a cost to there to rehiring someone. Number one, you have to spend time interviewing me. You're going to review 100 resumes. Then you're going to interview me, put me through a individual interview, a group interview, a screening panel. You can do my background check, make sure my degrees are real, make sure I'm real, make sure this and that. By the time you do all that, how much money and time have you wasted, right? That's the kind of data and metrics you need to present to senior management. That folks, if you just go through a bloodbath right now and just lay everybody off, then the re-engagement, the re-emergence of the team at the tail end is going to cost you a lot. So during this downtime, are there other things that we can do? Maybe there's some internal work we can do. Maybe we can improve our internal processes, things that we could not do for a long time. Many of you are home now. Maybe they're home projects you're seeing. Oh, I need to paint this. I need to fix this door. This knob is broken. This window has a crack, right? Maybe the same thing happens in your organizations. Maybe there's some internal things that we can work on. Use this time to upgrade your organization's skill set, maybe, right? Do some knowledge transfer internally. Hussam, you may be an expert in a particular area. Host a webinar for other folks within your organization. Share knowledge about something that you know about, for example. You know, if you can, go out and get external training, of course, as well. Yeah, so Iman asks a very nice question, which is how do you deal with people resisting to cooperate, especially with remote working and ignoring the checking of emails? Well, we need to establish some ground rules, folks. We need to deal with adults like adults and ask. You see, if you deal with me as an adult, chances are I might start behaving like an adult. But some ground rules need to be established there for sure. I mean, this is while we're in a crisis, we have an ethical, moral obligation that if someone's paying us, someone's taking care of our paycheck every month, we ought to be delivering some value. We ought to be doing something of value for the organization. So somehow that needs to be built. And that's a very good question, Iman. And I hope that that's something that we all as a collective agree. So it's our ethical, moral responsibility to really be. We were honored and lucky and fortunate. How many of our friends and associates out there have lost their jobs or are in the process of losing their jobs or are hurting in their business? And you and I, some of us are fortunate enough to have the water still flowing in terms of remuneration from a job or a business or a consulting engagement. We're very lucky. Let's honor that. Let's be mature about it. In terms of KPIs and metrics, look, I suggest the simple ones: velocity. Look at burn down charts. You're welcome to reach out to me separately, and I'll be happy to answer that in more detail, depending on the industry you're in. Okay. Yeah, so there's a very good question being asked between the ITPMO and IT service management. So ITPMO and ITSM that some of you may know from the Excelis world, like the ITIL world. Yes, of course there's an overlap. There's an overlap between all these things. We coexist in an ecosystem. We're like the Amazon jungle, folks. So a bunch of different creatures coexist. So the PMO doesn't exist in a vacuum. We coexist with operations, we coexist with the risk team, we coexist with the business continuity team, we coexist with the finance department, right? We coexist with HR, with L&D, and we coexist with ITSM. And so there needs to be a clear line of where we will collaborate, clear line of roles and responsibilities, back to just clarifying RACI at an organizational level for, department by department, that would be very, very important, right? Abdullah, that's a very important thing. Integrating contingency plan, the operations plan, absolutely. Contingency planning, of course, is very important for projects, but it is equally important for operations as well, right? So the same principles apply there. The same measuring techniques apply there. Nothing different there. Very good question, though. Yeah, so Rakesh, your comment is valid. Yeah, so if you feel a country A, I don't want to name any country, is maybe becoming a bottleneck, well then, yeah, you need to think of other options. Absolutely. You don't want to have a sole source. You want to have multiple sources for supplies. You're absolutely correct. I see. So Ahmed raises a very important question about the fact that his organization has adopted the virtual workforce very, very rapidly and totally embraced it. But there is a particular PM in his ecosystem that isn't quite as excited about this and has distanced himself even more. Well, someone needs to have a heart-to-heart conversation with this person, a positive tone, constructive conversation. And it's easy for me to say that. It's very difficult to do in the real world, but we need to have that positive tone, constructive conversation that and then solutionize with the person, you know. And it may be a difficult conversation, it may be a difficult series of conversations, but it needs to happen if this person is valuable. If not, they need to have a plan B, unfortunately. If this project manager is not delivering value, then is there an assistant project manager or someone else who can fill in the gaps while this person is sort of a little MIA? That's got to be important. Yeah, Arwa. So there is a certificate for if you're asking about the certified PMO professional training, yes, there is a certificate for that. After the 5 days, you do an exam and then you get certified from the examining body. and all that fun stuff. Yes, absolutely. For startup organization, Hind, you can have a PMO either by department or EPMO. It might be easier to do just one PMO initially, probably, because that alone is quite a bit of work. We've launched a lot of PMOs, and that alone is considerable amount of work. So you might want to just start with just one PMO if you're starting things. Um, okay. Hello, Adnan. Nice to meet you. Thank you. Thank you all for your comments. Yes, please ask a question. This is the place to ask your questions. Um, yeah, well, why was there no risk management plan for this pandemic? No PMO, no government was prepared for this risk. That's why it's called the unknown unknowns, the unknowable unknowns. We're all surprised. Military leaders get surprised. Military leaders prepare for the worst, right? They prepare for wars, yet they get surprised. So, let's not beat the human race up too much on this. I mean, we're all part of this collective. Look, how do risk managers identify risks? Let's understand that. Where do risk managers or your CEO or your CFO or your chief CRO, if you have a chief risk officer, how do they identify risks? It comes from us, you and me and everybody in the organization, right? I tell someone, hey, there's a risk of fraud. Hey, there's a risk of this. There's a risk of this. And I raise it up. So maybe we didn't keep our eyes open. So it's a collective responsibility, right? That's what I'm saying. It's a very humbling experience, this COVID-19. It brings to reality the fact that we're all in this together. Thank you, Koser. So Koser says that Koser is going to do the first thing that this person is going to do is a self-risk assessment. So very good. All right, folks, we're getting close to our time. Again, I just wanted to just quickly mention that there is a certification track taking place starting April 12th, for those of you interested. Certified PMO professional, and it will go into the PMO world in depth over 5 days. And, you'll have to bear with me for 5 days if you decide to join that. But jokes aside, it's a very valuable program, very practical oriented, and of course there is an exam like any certification on the last day, which will be Thursday, and then you would be certified from the examining body once you pass that exam. But more important than that, I really, really appreciate everyone's time. Thank you for taking the time out. It is really important for you all to please practice social distancing. I just have a very good friend who lost his brother last week, young man. So, age is no barrier for this. Someone I knew personally. So obviously, when you know someone personally who suddenly dies from a disease that you can't even see with your eyes, it's unbelievable. The humans have been able to create nuclear bombs, but we're not being able to deal with the COVID-19, which is quite a humbling experience. So please take care of yourself. Please take care of your family members. Take care of your associates. Look after your business ventures with a very rational mindset, and take this time to reflect both personally but also professionally. This is a time for you to do an inventory assessment of your skills, of your capabilities, and really do an analysis of areas that there are gaps where you can make some improvements. Again, thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.
Okay, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It was our pleasure to have you all here with us today. I really hope that you found this webinar interesting and beneficial. So, as Mr. Hasnain mentioned, we will have a PMO training starting on Sunday from 12th till 16th of April. It will be about the project management office, but PMO professional, where on the last day you get the PMO certification. So if you would like to know more about this, you have my email and you can contact me for more information. Once again, thanks for joining us, and I wish you a good evening ahead. Stay home.